So I wanted to start today as we continue to talk about women in the Bible and especially sort of reflect a little bit on our conversation last week and then start in this week with Miriam and Hannah to share this quote with you from Phyllis Tribble. Is everybody seeing that? Shake your heads. Great. Thanks, Phoebe. Phyllis Tribble is a really well-known Old Testament scholar. She wrote a book in the early 80s that really became a defining book for feminist biblical interpretation called Texts of Terror. I have it right here with me, where she really went through some of the most disturbing parts of the Old Testament where women are not safe or are not treated well, and really help to dig into those texts and help us as people of faith to understand them. And so I really love this quote from her where she talks about why, as a person of faith and as a woman, biblical scholar, why she has not abandoned scripture and how do we do this work together. So she says, first, you have to recognize that the Bible is a patriarchal text. But second, she brings a conviction that the Bible can be redeemed from bondage to patriarchy, that redemption is at work already in the text, and that the articulation of it is desirable and beneficial. Sometimes it is even fun. To bring together the self-critique that operates within the Bible with the concerns of feminism is to shape an interpretation that makes a difference for all of us. An interpretation that begins with suspicion and becomes subversion, but subversion for the sake of redemption, for the sake of healing, wholeness, and well-being. So I thought that was really just sort of a lovely way to think about how do we encounter some of these difficult texts, but also find them redemptive and informative to our life of faith and well-being. So I wanted to share that with you as we dig in to Miriam and Hannah this morning. So we're specifically talking about Miriam and Hannah because we're going to talk a little bit about women in song in both kind of the Old Testament and the New Testament. So this image that you're seeing here actually comes from an Egyptian temple along the Nile, the Edfu Temple, which is the temple to the god Horus. But you can see here these three women. Now I'll tell you that later Egyptians came to be a little afraid of the images that were in some of these pharaonic temples. And so that's why these women's faces have been scraped off the wall, because sometimes I thought they came alive at night. So that's a different class. We can talk about those kinds of things. But that's why these women are faceless. But you can see them standing there, and you can see that their arms are raised up and they have in their hands tambourines. And so this would have been very typical in the ancient Near East, that women were the song leaders of the community. And so you see images like this of women leading the people in song. Likely around this is the scene of a battle and the story of a battle. And this is often where women's songs came in. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but wanted to share this image with you from the Edfu Temple along the Nile. So we're going to start with Miriam. So Miriam, interestingly, Miriam, unlike any other or most other biblical women, she is never referred to as a wife or as a mother, but instead Miriam is called a prophet. And in fact, the first woman in the Old Testament named as a prophet. And just in case some of us aren't really up on our Miriam these days, I thought we would just walk through what we know about Miriam. So even though she's not named in the earliest stories in the book of Exodus, we know about the birth of Moses, and we know that Moses' sister played a significant role in that, right? Of all the stories that we learn as children, this is the story we learn, right? About the Pharaoh being very anxious that the Hebrews were growing in number and in strength. And so he had asked the Hebrew midwives to throw any male babies that were born into the Nile and kill them, so that they would not continue to prosper as a people. But Moses's mother had this child, and with the help of her daughter, hid the baby in the home, and then got to the point, we know this, that they knew that they wouldn't be able to hide the baby any longer. So they put Moses in a basket into the bulrushes in the Nile, and floated him down the Nile. And his sister walked along the riverbed to keep an eye on the baby in the basket. And so, as the baby is traveling down the river, the daughter of Pharaoh finds the baby, pulls him out of the water, names him Moses. And then the most extraordinary thing happens. A little Hebrew girl pops out from the bulrushes and says, "Hey, wouldn't it be convenient if I were able to find you very quickly a wet nurse who could take care of this baby for you? I know just the woman." And so Miriam is able to bring Moses back to their mother, where she cares for Moses. And then he later goes on to be raised in the palace, right? So we know Miriam is kind of a significant figure here, sort of following Moses and then intervening on his behalf and on their mother's behalf. So this is mostly what we know about Miriam. The thing that we're really going to talk about today is the Song of Miriam. So we're not going to get into the whole story of Moses, but we know that when the people finally leave Egypt and cross the sea, that the Egyptians follow behind on their chariots. And just as God had parted the waters for the Israelites, the waters come crashing back, and horse and rider are thrown into the sea, as the song says. So we're going to look at that in just a little bit, because Miriam helps to lead the people in song. But then there's this really fascinating story in the book of Numbers. This is the best I had as an image for leprosy here, but later on in Numbers, Moses had married Zipporah, who was a Cushite woman, and something weird's happening between Moses and his brother Aaron and his sister Miriam. And they speak up in the 12th chapter of Numbers and say, "Why is Moses the only one who seems to have authority around here? We're very uncomfortable with his wife, and we feel like our voices should be equal to Moses." And God is not a big fan of that, and inexplicably strikes Miriam with a skin disease, but not Aaron, even though he was sort of an equal complainant. And the people wait. Miriam repents, sort of puts herself in isolation, purifies herself, and returns to the community being healed. And then the community is able to continue on. But it's a really interesting story that you have Miriam kind of speaking up and saying, what gives? I am also a prophet of Israel, and the three of us together have been leading these people. Why does Moses seem to have so much more influence than we do? So it's an interesting story for Miriam. And then we hear about Miriam one more time a few chapters later in the book of Numbers, when she dies and is buried. And so the other interesting thing about Miriam is that she's listed later. The story of the Exodus is formative in the Old Testament. And so this image of liberation and this sort of image of Exodus appear throughout Scripture. And so, for example, you have in Micah 6:4, "For I brought you up out of the house of Egypt and redeemed you from the house of slavery, and I set before you Moses, Aaron, and Miriam." So even though Miriam gets punished for sort of elevating herself to the level of Moses, you can see that this would have been a common tradition, that Moses and Aaron and Miriam were considered this sort of team of leaders for the ancient Israelites. So what we're going to do is look a little bit at the Song of Miriam. But to look at the Song of Miriam, the first thing we have to do is look at the Song of Moses. So I just put the text right in here for us. And I'm going to read it to you rapidly because it's long. Good God, Moses. So it says, then Moses and the Israelites, so this is after they've crossed the sea and after the Egyptians have been defeated. Then Moses and the Israelites sang this song to the Lord. I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and rider he has thrown into the sea. The Lord is my strength and my might, and he has become my salvation. This is my God, and I will praise him, my father's God, and I will exalt him. The Lord is a warrior. The Lord is his name. Pharaoh's chariots and his army he cast into the sea. His picked officers were sunk in the Red Sea. The floods covered them. They went down into the depths like a stone. Your right hand, O Lord, glorious in power. Your right hand, O Lord, shattered the enemy. In the greatness of your majesty, you overthrew your adversaries. You sent out your fury. It consumed them like stubble. At the blast of your nostrils, the waters piled up. The flood stood in a heap. The deeps congealed in the heart of the sea. The enemy said, I will pursue, I will overtake, I will divide the spoil. My desire shall have its fill of them. I will draw my sword, my hand shall destroy them. You blew with your wind, the sea covered them. They sank like lead in the mighty waters. Who is like you, O Lord, among the gods? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in splendor, doing wonders? You stretched out your right hand, the earth swallowed them. In your steadfast love, you led the people who you redeemed. You guided them by your strength to your holy abode. The peoples heard, they trembled. Pangs seized the inhabitants of Philistia. The chiefs of Edom were dismayed. Trembling seized the leaders of Moab. All the inhabitants of Canaan melted away. Terror and dread fell upon them. By the might of your arm, they became still as a stone until your people, O Lord, passed by, until the people whom you acquired passed by. You brought them in and planted them on the mountain of your own possession, the place, O Lord, that you made your abode, the sanctuary, O Lord, that your hands have established. The Lord will reign forever and ever. When the horses of the Pharaoh with his chariots and his chariot drivers went into the sea, the Lord brought back the waters of the sea upon them, but the Israelites walked through the sea on dry ground. So this is what we call now, or that scripture calls the Song of Moses. But we're here to talk about the Song of Miriam. So let me show you what that looks like. Then the prophet Miriam, Aaron's sister, took a tambourine in her hand, and all the women went out after her with tambourines and with dancing. And Miriam sang to them, sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and rider he has thrown into the sea. So briefer than the other. So there are a lot of interesting things kind of happening here and interesting things happening kind of in the history of interpretation of these texts. So first, let's go back and look at Moses's song. So one of the things that biblical scholars know is that when you have pieces like this of poetry and of song, typically they're older than the narrative text that is around them, that these would have been hymn traditions or poetry traditions that then are included in a story, or that a story is created around it to explain the song. And so scholars think that this song here that we're looking at is probably the oldest written version of the story of the Exodus. And so it would have been a song that was sung in the Kingdom of Israel about the Exodus. And then when these stories were put together many, many years later, it would have been included and the story written around it. So scholars for a long time have said, well, this is just lovely. Moses is amazing. It's a great song. And Miriam, meh, that's so lovely that she pitched in there right at the end, right? That Miriam's song was considered to be lesser than Moses' song. So it was actually in the early 20th century that biblical scholars started looking a little bit more closely at why the story is written this way. Why do you have this one giant song and then this one little song? So is it just that, Miriam and the women are just echoing Moses and maybe echoing the men's song? So it's sort of a call and response that Moses sings this great song and then the women kind of pitch in and give sort of an amen to that song. That's kind of been how it's been interpreted in the past. But scholars are thinking more and more that it's much more likely that actually the song would have completely belonged to Miriam from the beginning. So there are a couple reasons why they think that. One is, I'm going to back up. This is like a technical little piece. So you see Miriam's song here. There's very much a sense that Miriam is leading the people in song, right? And her opening piece to the song is sort of like a declarative statement, right? Sing to the Lord, right? It's sort of telling the people, now we will come and sing to the Lord. And I'm going to back up here. And so I will sing to the Lord sounds much more responsive actually than Miriam's, if that makes sense. So she is directing the people to sing. And then Moses is then responding and saying, I will sing to the Lord. Scholars also kind of say that there's not really a reason. This is sort of the voodoo that sometimes is biblical scholarship. Don't tell Joshua, but that, well, you look at it and say, well, why would you preserve this small little piece at the end? Why would the redactors, why would the writers of this, and even include that? And so one of the reasons why you include it is because it was significant, right? So it was a way to include this tradition of Miriam's song, to sort of give Miriam a voice in this, but to rewrite the song so that Moses comes out, to rewrite the text so that Moses comes out more prominently in the story. So scholars really think there would be no reason to have even retained this little piece about Miriam at the end if she wasn't actually integral to the creation and the sort of tradition of the song. So that then what we really think about for Miriam is that she, this is a great quote from another biblical scholar, Lynn Japinga, who's written this really lovely new book that goes through sort of little bits into women's stories called From Widows to Warriors. She writes, if Miriam created the song, she demonstrated a remarkable ability to put words to music and to capture the sense of celebration and gratitude among the people. If she was the song leader, she demonstrated an ability to get the people to sing together, which is no easy task. And so we really think of Miriam as inaugurating in this spot in Exodus, inaugurating a long tradition that you see throughout the Old Testament and then even into the New Testament of women leading the community in song, in practice, as well as the sort of tradition of women's voice being celebrated in song. These songs often, just like in what we consider Moses's song, but even in the text here of the little bit of what's claimed as Miriam's, they're often very militaristic songs. They're these oldest examples of Hebrew poetry. And so they're really showing this kind of vocal and instrumental musical tradition. They were likely ritualized dances that would have recreated, even with tambourine and with dancing, these sort of sensations and images of battle. So that gets us, to this image from that wall at the temple in Edfu, this idea that it was women's role. And so Miriam is kind of sort of the first voice that we hear in this to help celebrate as a community both the power of God and the people's success in battle. So you see examples of that throughout. So we talked a little briefly about this last week about the story of Jephthah's daughter in Judges. And so Jephthah, this is the text 1134, Jephthah came to his home at Mizpah, and there was his daughter coming out to meet him with timbrels and with dancing. It's important then, the text says she was his only child. He had no son or daughter except her, because Jephthah has promised to sacrifice whatever greets him first out of his home. Scholars would argue that that was a stupid vow because everyone knew that the first group to greet you when you come home from battle are women dancing and in song. So it's this tradition. You have This is a weird story as well from Judges. And this is where we get deep in the weird. When here, Judges 21:21 says, when the young women of Shiloh came out to dance in the dances, then come out of the vineyards, and each of you carry off a wife for himself from the young women of Shiloh and go to the land of Benjamin. This is the men are giving instructions because they couldn't find any women to claim for themselves after the battle. And so they knew there would be women coming out unprotected to greet them home. And so when the women come out to celebrate our victory in battle, just grab one of those ladies and she can be your wife. So it's so much a tradition that women come out and do this celebratory dancing and singing, that this was their plan to find wives. You have the stories in the book of First Samuel, when David has gone out and is defeating. David and Saul are coming back as they were coming home. When David returned from killing the Philistine, the women came out of all the towns of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tambourines, with songs of joy, and with musical instruments. And the women sang to one another as they made merry. Saul has killed his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. And this made Saul very upset that the women's song celebrated David's victories over his. And so, as you know, things didn't go well between David and Saul from this point on. But then you also have in the Psalms, this idea of the community celebrating in dance and women leading these celebrations. Your solemn processions are seen, O God, in the processions of my God, my King, into the sanctuary. The singers in front, the musicians last, between them girls playing tambourines. And you have as well in Psalm 149, let them praise his name with dancing, making melody to him with tambourine and lyre. For the Lord takes pleasure in his people. He adorns the humble with victory. So if we think of Miriam as probably being the originator of this song and of being a part of a long tradition, even though, you know, the text that we have today just gives her this smaller song to sing, we can see in other places when there are much greater songs that women have sung in scripture. So one of those, of course, is the Magnificat, the Song of Mary that we have in the first chapter of the Gospel of Luke. And we're actually going to look at these passages in 2 weeks about Mary and Elizabeth together and sort of the role of those women in the story of Jesus. But scholars can take, I didn't think we had time today to look at this, but can take almost line for line the lyrics of Miriam's song, the lengthy song, and the lyrics of the Magnificat, and they sound like an echo to one another. That the Magnificat is a song sung in the tradition of a song tradition that Miriam inaugurates in that way. But you also have the Song of Deborah, which comes early on in the book of Judges as Deborah goes with the armies out into war, that Deborah celebrates their victory as they return. And you also even have this song tradition in the opening and closing of Proverbs, this woman wisdom sort of singing to the people and through the song and poetry, sort of declaring her identity and what it means for people to value and to be engaged with wisdom, and even the song and poem at the end of Proverbs about what it means to be a wife and a good wife in that place. So you can see this tradition of women and women in song throughout the Old and the New Testament. And so that takes us to our second woman this morning, and that is the song of Hannah that we see early on in the second chapter, or in the first chapter. We hear about Hannah in the first chapter of Samuel, and then hear her song in the second chapter. So let's talk a little bit about Hannah and her song. So just to remind everybody what is happening when we get into 1 Samuel, that the people have left Egypt They've been in the wilderness. They've gotten into the promised land. They're living in the promised land. That's a lot of the stories of Judges. But things haven't always gone the best. The refrain that we hear throughout the book of Judges over and over again is, and the people just did what they thought was right in their own eyes. And it never goes well. I've been hearing that refrain in my head a lot these days as well. So the people are just kind of doing what they want to do. And because there's this sense that these people have been led out and have been brought here by God, and that is where their loyalty should lie, is to God and not to a king. And so that's why God says to them, you don't need a king, you have me. And by the time we get to the First Samuel, the people are like, it is not working. We have to have a king. And so First Samuel brings us into these stories of the creation of the kings, and then the sort of battles and foibles of the kings of Israel. And so the whole sort of opening of First Samuel is, how do we get to this place where the people are able to find a king and create this kingdom together? And so that's where we hear the stories of Hannah and her son Samuel. So, and they take up both chapter 1 and 2 of First Samuel is mostly about Hannah. So this whole story that is about the coming and the ruling of all the kings of Israel, the beginning of this is all about Hannah. So in the opening of Samuel, we're not going to read through all of that because I want us to get to the song. We're introduced to these sort of seemingly random characters, Elkanah and his 2 wives. One is Hannah, who is barren, and one is Peninnah, who has 3 children. And things aren't great in their household because Peninnah isn't just prolific in having children, she's kind of a jerk about it and is constantly needling Hannah and making Hannah feel horrible for not being able to bear children. And Elkanah takes pity on Hannah and cares for her, and the story says that he especially loved her. He gives her extra portions of food to make up for that. That's problematic, but that things aren't great in the household. But we're told that every year they make the pilgrimage to Shiloh and to pray before God and to make sacrifice. And so we travel with the family to Shiloh, and there we meet the prophet and the priest, Eli, who is sort of he's the main priest at Shiloh and becomes a significant part of Samuel's life. And so what happens there, we're actually going to look at this text. They get up to Shiloh, and Hannah decides to sort of take her fate into her own hands. And so starting at verse 9, after they had eaten and drunk at Shiloh, Hannah rose and presented herself before the Lord. Now Eli, the priest, was sitting on the seat beside the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. She was deeply distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. She made this vow: O Lord of hosts, if only you will look on the misery of your servant and remember me, and not forget your servant, but will give to your servant a male child. Then I will set him before you as a Nazirite until the day of his death. He shall neither drink wine nor intoxicants, and no razor shall touch his head. As she continued praying before the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was praying silently, and only her lips moved, but her voice was not heard. Therefore, Eli thought she was drunk. So Eli said to her, "How long will you make a drunken spectacle of yourself? Put away your wine." But Hannah answered, "No, my lord, I am a woman deeply troubled. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Do not regard your servant as a worthless woman, for I have been speaking out of my great anxiety and vexation all this time." Then Eli answered, "Go in peace. The God of Israel grant the petition you have made to him." And she said, "Let your servant find favor in your sight." Then the woman went to her quarters, ate and drank with her husband, and her countenance was sad no longer. So the story goes on. Elkanah and his family go back to their home, and Hannah becomes pregnant and gives birth to a son named Samuel. And so she has promised this child to God to set him out as a Nazarite. It's likely the only other Nazarite you've ever heard of might be John the Baptist, who also didn't drink wine or intoxicants and didn't cut his hair. I guess Samson was a Nazarite as well. But she stays home the next year when they go up to Shiloh. She says to Elkanah, let me stay home with the child, and when he is ready, I will take him up and offer him to God. So she keeps the child at home with her until, the text tells us, until he was weaned. So we don't know when exactly that was. But then she takes him up to the temple and offers her child, so still very young, over to Eli to be a Nazarite and to be trained to become a priest there at the temple of Shiloh. So, in that moment, after Hannah hands over her child, she sings this song. Hannah prayed and said, my whole heart exalts in the Lord. My strength is exalted in my God. My mouth derides my enemies because I rejoice in my victory. There is no holy one like the Lord, no one besides you. There is no rock like our God. Talk no more so very proudly. Let not arrogance come from your mouth, for the Lord is a God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed. The bows of the mighty are broken, but the feeble gird on strength. Those who were full have hired themselves out for bread, but those who were hungry are fat with spoil. The barren has borne 7, but she who has many children is forlorn. The Lord kills and brings to life. He brings down to Sheol and raises up. The Lord makes poor and makes rich. He brings low, he also exalts. He raises up the poor from the dust. He lifts the needy from the ash heap to make them sit with princes and inherit a seat of honor. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and on them he has set the world. He will guard the feet of his faithful ones, but the wicked shall be cut off in darkness. For not by might does one prevail. The Lord, his adversaries shall be shattered. The Most High will thunder in heaven. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to his king and exalt the power of his anointed. So this is very much, it sounds similar to the Magnificat, to Miriam's song as well. It is clearly a song of doxology, written in the same tradition of other public hymns in Israel from the time, both a praise of God and a thanksgiving for the gifts of God. The thing that's weird about this song, right? So, what did I already say? So, we're in a period where there is no king. And yet the song ends, the Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to his king and exalt the power of his anointed. The kings would have been considered anointed by God. And in fact, in just a few chapters away, Saul will be anointed and then David will be anointed as kings. And so it's a little anachronistic. How can Hannah be singing the song of giving strength to a king when no kings exist? So just as much as I just tried to convince you that Miriam's song really belonged to her, scholars really believe that this song does not belong to Hannah, that this was a song that would have been used maybe at the inauguration of a king, that then was taken from that tradition, that sort of public tradition of doxology, and put in the voice of Hannah, who has just given birth to the priest that will become essentially the king maker. Brevard Childs, who was a very well-known Old Testament scholar, talks about Hannah's song and says that the writers put this song at the very beginning because this song in the voice of Hannah becomes an interpretive key for all the stories of the kings of Israel, about sort of the power and the willingness of God to intrude and to intervene and to invert the story of Israel. So you see here a song all about how God reverses things, how he provides for those who are in need, that he has created even the pillars of the earth. And so it's a way to say to Israel, even though we are in trouble, even though we are in need, God will always come in and intervene in the same way that God intervened for Hannah. So we're going to look at two other scholars' thoughts on this. The first, because I can't talk about these things without quoting Walter Brueggemann. So Walter Brueggemann wrote, Israel's life has to do with the power and fidelity of God. In the chapters to come, Israel will be tempted to flex its muscles, to be inordinately impressed with the power and pomp and privilege, and with David. This narrative stands poignantly as a counter affirmation of what is to come. Israel's new life emerges out of barrenness by the power of God. That power is inexplicable, but also irresistible. The power is evoked, summoned, and triggered by lowly Hannah, who had no virtue, no claim, no capacity, only a stubborn insistence addressed to Yahweh, and a readiness to yield back all good gifts. So to say, so Brueggemann again is sort of looking at the significance of starting the entire story of the kingdoms and the kings of Israel with the story of a barren woman, that she then becomes sort of the image of Israel, and that God intervenes and that God provides life and hope and victory for Hannah and will again for the people. But even so, Joanne Hackett, who was a biblical scholar at Harvard, looks at the reality that maybe this wasn't Hannah's song herself, that this was a public song that was put in Hannah's voice. But this is her reflection on the significance still of it being a part of the story of the people. So she says there's significance to incorporating into a narrative of childbirth, a song that includes language and themes appropriate to a wide range of Israel's religious life. Thanksgiving and praise of holiness, defeat of enemies, wisdom, battle, creation, and power over life and death, storm God imagery, Yahweh's relationship to chosen leaders. This juxtaposition of childbirth and then these sort of public religious life pieces has the effect of recognizing without fanfare fertility in childbirth as an equal issue in importance to the others and worthy of the attention of Yahweh and of Israel's singers. Fertility and childbirth are mainstream religious issues in this literature and not treated separately from other pressing matters. So her point being that to take the story of a single woman and her infertility and her then birth and then generosity and thankfulness, to be putting that story in the context of this great public and regal hymn is a way to elevate women's stories and to say that this was a significant part of Israel's religious sort of traditions as well. Phew. So these are just two examples. We'll look a little bit at the Magnificat when we get into the New Testament, but you can see as well this sort of story. You can see as well how some of these stories of Miriam and Hannah connect with those stories that we told last week as well of Sarah and Hagar and the relationships between women. There you can see that in Hannah. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and open it up for some conversation and questions. And I'm going to let you unmute yourselves if you want to chat a little bit. I have one more thing to share with you as a closing, but we can chat a little bit through this now. Great. I want to end, I'm looking to see if anybody is trying to talk. I want to end by sharing just a portion of a song with you. I had really hoped I was going to be able to find a video of these women singing, but I couldn't. And so it is, it's just the audio of it. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the group Sweet Honey in the Rock, which is a really well known African American women's a cappella group that was started by Bernice Johnson Reagan, who is a scholar of music and especially civil rights music, created this group. And so they sing some traditional songs, but then they've written songs as well and actually sing a significant amount of religious songs. And so they have this beautiful song that is based on Isaiah 45. So the text is calling out and saying, "Sing, O barren one," right? And so it's again using this imagery of Israel as a barren woman who needs to call out for help in the world, to be able to call upon God to intervene and to care for them. So we're just gonna, I don't want anybody to freak out. This is an 11-minute video. We're only gonna watch like we're only gonna listen to about 4 minutes of it. So we're gonna do that as our closing prayer this morning, this afternoon. I don't know. Well, and are you all seeing my YouTube page now? Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. Great. Okay. So there's nothing really to watch. We're just going to listen to it for a little bit, but to hear their voices and to hear them sort of singing the songs of both this sort of cry of the barren woman, but then also this tradition of song in the Old Testament. Here we go.
Empty and lonely I was, wordless and useless I felt, bounded and closed I wandered, empty and useless I was. Then I heard children of the desolate than the children of the married wife. For more are the children of the desolate than the children of the married wife. Then I heard open wide your curtains in Open wide your curtains, enlarge the place of your tents, lengthen your cords, strengthen the stakes in the ground, for you will spread abroad to the right, you will spread abroad to the left, your children will be nation, I'll be for your valley, open wide your curtains, strengthen the stakes in the ground. Yes,
I'm going to go ahead and stop it there. I did find it. It's Isaiah 54. So again, this is a good way to end, to share this text with you. So in Isaiah 54, a song to Jerusalem, but in the voice and sort of directed at a barren woman. Sing, O barren one who did not bear. Burst into song and shout, you who have not been in labor. For the children of the desolate woman will be more than the children of her that is married, says the Lord. Enlarge the site of your tent, and let the curtains of your habitations be stretched out. Do not hold back, lengthen your cords, and strengthen your stakes, for you will spread out to the right and to the left, and your descendants will possess the nations and will settle the desolate towns. It goes on and on, but it is that is in the tradition of Miriam and of Hannah and of all these women who have led the people in song and that have allowed their experiences of women to integrate with the experiences of the people of Israel as well. So I'm so grateful for all of you. Next week, we're going to do the unnamed women in the New Testament and their role. So we'll focus especially on the woman caught in adultery and the woman at the well, but talk about sort of all of these women who have a significant role in the New Testament, but who are unnamed. So I'm grateful for all of you, and I hope you have a good day.